And thanks so much to Farming for Nature and to Burn Bio for the invitation. It's always great to speak about the pollinator plan, but it's great to see so many people tuning in as well, because we're all very aware that at the moment there's a lot more serious worrying issues right now in a time of a public health crisis. So thank you for your interest in this. So I suppose I work on the pollinator plan. I'm just going to share my screen. Now, hope that's working okay. So yeah, I work on the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. And I just want to explain a little bit about the plan so that when I talk about gardens in particular, it'll put it into context of how each sector is working on this plan. So, sorry. Sometimes we start off talking about sectors and businesses and councils and all that, and we don't really explain what pollinators are. So just very quickly, we do see an awful lot about bees on social media. People are always, tweeting photographs. You see Facebook posts about them. So just explain why that is. Pollination is the movement of pollen from one flower to another, and we need that service to produce seed and to produce new fruits and new plants. So pollination relies on either insect pollination or wind pollination. Wind pollinated plants are the ones that cause hay fever in us. And we know that fruits and vegetables that are pollinated by insects are actually the ones that are most nutritious and healthy for us to eat. So it's really, really important for our diet. So it's the insects that help those plants. So all of these sort of foods, without bees, we wouldn't have them. My son, I'm ashamed to say, he's 10 years old, and he looked at our apple tree yesterday, and he said, "I thought this was an apple tree. Why does it have flowers on it?" And I thought that was very telling, that we all assume, that everyone knows this, that each flower can turn into a fruit. But just to mention that if people are new to pollination. Why are bees important? Well, there are 5-star pollinators. So other insects do pollination, but bees are the most important. And this is because baby bees eat only pollen. So the bumblebees and solitary bees have to go out and collect pollen and bring it back to their nest to feed to the baby bees. And they need lots of different types of pollen from different types of plants to have a healthy, balanced diet. So they're completely focused on it, whereas other insects might not. For instance, wasps, they feed their young with insects, so they won't be fully focused on gathering pollen. So I suppose there's 3 main areas why pollination is important. Obviously, for the economy, pollination services contribute 59 million annually to the Irish economy. And you can break that down across different crops. For instance, it's £7 million in Northern Ireland for apples, or 3.9 million euros in the Republic of Ireland for rapeseed. And the important thing to say about this is it's kind of difficult to put a figure on it, because we have to remember that it's irreplaceable. So you can't just go out and fix the problem. If you lose your insect pollinators, you can't replace them, you can't bring in hives. And I'll explain that later. And we should know that it's growing all the time. So in the last 10 years, the value of soft fruit, field vegetables, and apple production have all increased significantly. And also, I suppose, when we're chatting to farmers, we do have to remind ourselves and in our own gardens that even if you're not growing crops that are insect pollinated now, it is about resilience. Like we talk a lot about in climate action about resilience to change and being able to leave the planet in a good state for future generations. But even in terms of your farm or land you own, you want your grandchildren or your grandchildren's children to be able to decide to grow insect pollinated crops if they want to. We want to keep that ability. Then, as I mentioned, for health and well-being, for food, it's really, really important. Again, on social media, sometimes you see a lot of scaremongering about, if the bees die, we all die. That's not strictly true. We would still have those wind pollinated crops and cereals, but it would be very, very difficult to have a healthy, balanced diet without all these insect pollinated fruit and veg. Another area of why pollination is important, and we tend to overlook it a lot, is in terms of our wildlife and our landscape. So about 78% of all our wild plants and trees and flowers in the countryside are also insect pollinated. So without insect pollinators, bees, Ireland would look like a very different place. That's a very simplistic graphic to explain that, but it is really important to grasp that. So, how Ireland looks really benefits our tourism sector. We want to create a green image when we're marketing our products abroad. If that changes, if we suddenly don't have, a pretty countryside with lots of wildflowers and flowering trees, because we've lost our pollinators, that has an impact on selling our products abroad. And we want, that green image to have substance and not just be spin. So more wild plants actually means more seeds, more fruits, which feed our birds and mammals. So it's also really important for other types of wildlife. So you may not necessarily be interested in bees, but by helping bees, you're helping all types of biodiversity. And the actions, as we'll talk about later, the actions are anything you do that will be good for bees will also be good for birds and mammals and all types of wildlife. So this is another kind of graphic to show you the produce choice with bees and your produce choice without bees. So you can see that straight away, the availability of foods is going to be affected, and the price. So obviously the price would go up if it was more difficult to get insect pollinated foods. So again, in your garden, if you want to, you can grow all these different types of fruit and veg. So if we want to do that, or we want to do it in the future, or we want our kids to do it, it's about maintaining that ability. Who are the pollinators in Ireland? As I said, most is done by bees, and it's so about 80% is done by our bees, and then the rest is done by insects like hoverflies, some by moths, butterflies, and even the wasps do a little bit of pollination. And in terms of our species, so we have just one honeybee species. A lot of people are surprised to hear this. We've 99 bee species in Ireland. One is the honeybee, and then we have 21 bumblebees and 77 different solitary bee species, and these are wild pollinators. So just again to explain, again, you see an awful lot about honeybees online and on social media, all about honey, and honeybees are great, and we all love honey. But it is important to realise that, they have done research to show, for instance, in the UK, research has shown that if they were to use all of their honeybee hives purely for crop pollination, they'd only be able to cover about 1/3 of the service required by their crops, and the rest is done by these wild pollinators. So it's really important that we have healthy honeybees, but we also keep our diversity and abundance of wild bees and other insects, especially hoverflies, which are the next most important to bees. So these are our bumblebees, just to show you the variety of colours. They're lovely looking insects. They're valuable to preserve in their own right, never mind the pollination services they provide. Really, really beautiful animals and really interesting life cycle. I just want to talk about this briefly because it'll explain why they're in trouble and why they need our help. So the bumblebees, queen bumblebee hibernates over winter. And she has to, when she wakes up in spring, she has to feed and find a nest site, a suitable nest site. Then she prepares a pollen loaf. She has to visit lots of flowers and gather pollen. She brings that pollen loaf to the nest and a nectar pot. And then she starts laying eggs, fertilized with sperms stored from the previous year. These develop into female workers who emerge and take over the nesting duties. Then she stays in the nest and lays eggs. That's her job then, and the workers go out to collect pollen and pollinate crops, of course. Then in mid to late summer, the queen lays unfertilized eggs, which will become the males, and she'll allow some new queens to develop, and those new queens and males will leave the nest and find mates. And it's these mated queens that hibernate over the next winter. So as you can see, she needs food right through the season. So it's not, we tend to think of bees in summer, but she'll need food and safe nesting sites right from spring right through to autumn. You might also notice that the males don't do any work. They're only interested in drinking nectar and finding girls. Luckily, there's no other parallels in other species. So this is an apple orchard in Tipperary, and it's interesting again to kind of think of how the bees are living. So this apple farmer, if he wants a lot of bumblebees on his property to pollinate the apple trees in May and June, when they need to be pollinated, he also has to keep in mind, well, are they getting any food? Are they having safe nest sites outside of the season? So when there are no apple blossoms in flower, what are they meant to live on? and is the area safe for them, because they will only travel about 1 to 2 kilometers from their nest. And you know, you can imagine if this is a very intensively farmed area, or if there's a lot of pesticides, it can affect the bumblebees' survival. So it's simple things like willow and dandelions in spring. Later in the summer, you've clover and knapweed, ivy, really, really important native plants to feed pollinators. So again, you know, we do think of them during the summer. We often go to garden centres in the summer and say, I want to buy, you know, bee-friendly plants, but it is really, the hunger gaps occur in early spring and in late autumn when they're building up their reserves for hibernation. This is Bombus terrestris, the buff-tailed bumblebee, and she has to, when she comes out of hibernation, she has to visit 6,000 flowers a day just to get enough energy to brood her first batch of eggs. And so basically, if you can think of it, you know, that if she fails, the colony fails. So really, really important. You know, you do hear a lot again about dandelions, but it's actually true, really, really important source of pollen and nectar, as are these wildflowers that you see in the summer months. Clover used to be called bee's bread, really, really important source of pollen and nectar. Then in autumn, she has to reach 0.6 grams to successfully hibernate. Again, you're talking about next year's generation. Really important that she has a successful hibernation. These are our solitary bees. Now, a lot of people don't know about solitary bees, and it's only when you learn about them you start to notice them more and more on your plants. Really beautiful, a lot of variety as well. So I suppose even though you haven't seen them before or heard of them, it is important to say they are really good pollinators. And that's because they're really bad at it. They're very inefficient at collecting pollen. So unlike the honeybee and bumblebees who moisten the pollen and collect it in specialised hairs on their back legs, these guys just use it as dry pollen, and it would either be stored on these hairs on their back legs or on their abdomen. So they drop an awful lot. So it means that they actually do an awful lot more pollination. They have to make a lot more trips. So their inefficiency absolutely helps us for our crop pollination. Just not in terms of their life cycle, as the name suggests, they are solitary. They don't have, you know, the small bumblebee colonies or the large honeybee colonies. These guys live alone. So they basically, the females and males emerge in spring. They mate. Then the female again does all the work. She prefers a nest. She has to lay eggs and leave a food supply of pollen. She'll seal up each. She lays an egg and then leaves a little pollen supply and seals up each cell. And then all the males and females die, and it's the larvae that overwinter in this case. So again, safe nest sites and food sources right through the season are really, really important. Where do the solitary bees live? So 62 species, 80% of our solitary bees are mining bees. So again, you hear an awful lot about bee hotels. They are unsuitable for the mining bees. These bees need kind of bare soil on south or east facing banks. That's what they're looking for. Really easy to create. You might see a little hole like this in your lawn or on a bank where they've excavated the soil. Really interesting, great thing to show kids. So they go in there, they lay their eggs, and then they seal it and they're gone. So if you do have them in your garden, they don't cause any problems. You know, both bumblebees and solitary bees are very, very passive animals. You know, they don't sting. You'd have to actually catch one maybe to make it sting you, but they just have no interest in anything but flowers. These are we also have 15 cavity nesting bees who nest in south facing stone walls in existing holes in structures or in wood. And again, they're really popular in terms of making bee hotels, but it is important to know that only about 10 species in Ireland will use those bee hotels. So much more important to have a kind of a solid bank of south or east facing clay. You just go out with a spade and create that sort of habitat. Solitary bees travel even less than the bumblebees. So again, with the apple farmer, if he wants solitary bees here pollinating his apple crops, he has to know that there's also food plants outside of the apple blossom season within about 100 to 200 meters of nests. So it really concentrates your mind on what the bees need. Are the pollinators declining in Ireland? Yes, unfortunately, the bad news is that they are. So more than half of our species have undergone substantial decline since 1980. 2 species have already become extinct. it's also been shown that, rare species are disappearing through loss of semi-natural habitats, but the common species also are declining in abundance. So it's not just the rare species that are disappearing, and that's down to how we manage the landscape. So the National Biodiversity Data Centre, who implement the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, their monitoring schemes have shown a decrease in common bumblebees of 14% since 2012. So it's a very significant loss. Why are they declining? So it's down to changes in landscape, really. So these sort of habitats that used to be very common in Ireland, natural hay meadows, and the way we manage the land has obviously changed. And it's meant a loss in habitats, safe nesting sites, a general decline in food, causing hunger, so less wildflowers in the landscape. Then we've inadvertently introduced pests and disease when we've brought in bees and so on. And then their exposure to pesticides obviously has a huge effect on bees' ability to reproduce. And then climate change, of course, is causing a negative challenge. So I suppose the pollinator plan came about to address these issues. To a very brave and humble scientists, Dr. Una Fitzpatrick in the National Biodiversity Data Centre and Professor Jane Stout in Trinity College, decided rather than just tracking these declines in bees, can they do something about it? So they drew up the pollinator plan and got together a 15-member steering group. They approached lots of governmental and non-governmental organisations to agree a shared plan and identified all these actions to make Ireland more pollinator friendly. So the number of partners is growing all the time. It's over 100 now. And I don't want to name anyone in particular because I know that, you naturally leave people out, but it has absolutely been amazing. So the sector engagement, the buy-in from all our different partners has been really overwhelming. It's such a positive project to work on. Everyone is so open to it, from farmers to businesses, Department of Agriculture. It's just been amazing to work on. So in terms of the actions, there's 42 actions around farmland, public land and private land. This is where gardens would fall in. And then there's actions around raising awareness, supporting beekeepers, expanding our knowledge and tracking change and measuring success. The steering group can be seen here. I should have said, actually, this presentation can be available to anyone who wants it as a PDF. So these are our steering group from lots of different organisations in Northern Ireland and in the Republic. So a nice cross-section. So I suppose, simply put, I'm sure this is why you really tune in, was, it's about providing food, shelter and safety for pollinators. It's about looking at any piece of land and saying, am I providing food, shelter and safety, and how could that be improved? So it's quite simple. For bumblebees, if you're talking about shelter, it's long grass, often at the base of a hedgerow. For mining bees, it's these sort of bare banks of soil. For cavity nesting solitary bees, it's hollow stems and hollow wood. For safety, it's around eliminating or reducing the use of pesticides. And food, it's providing these wildflowers or ornamental flowers that provide good sources of pollen nectar right through from spring through to autumn. So in turn, sometimes people say, I don't know anything about plants, I don't know where to start. Well, actually, it's about changing. You don't have to let the whole place go wild, maybe. Sometimes it's about changing the management of the site just to make it more flower rich. And these sort of plants will show up if you've hedgerows, if you've natural native Irish hedgerows, for instance. Meadows or areas of long grass, you'll get these sort of plants. Edges of tracks that aren't sprayed, you'll get dead nettle, forget-me-not, those sort of plants. And basically the native are really good. The native plants, this is what they've evolved to feed on. Really good for our pollinators, but also if you want to plant ornamental varieties, there's lots of different options there. And all of these planting lists are available on our website, which I'll show you in a second. So I suppose the pollinator plan is about coming together, every different sector, to ask, what can I do to help pollinators and therefore all of our biodiversity? So it's about businesses, local authorities, religious properties, schools, residents associations and gardens. So we've published these different evidence-based actions on guidelines on how you can help. There's a junior plan, there's a plan for farmland, local communities, transport corridors. And it's really important to say that all of these are evidence-based, so we know that based on scientific research that if you make these changes, it will help pollinators, and we see it time and time again. And they're a very easy group to help, actually. You know, if you put in the resources, they will return. So for instance, yeah, as well, I suppose we're trying to make towns and villages more pollinator friendly, our transport routes, so you can see that you're creating a patchwork of pollinator friendly habitats across the countryside. This is Kilbarry Nature Reserve in Cork, or in Waterford, and it was actually an old landfill site that the council decided to make into a nature park, amazing site to visit. And this is the large carder bee, which is quite endangered in Europe, and it's on the European red lists. And it was never very common in Ireland, but it's doing okay in Ireland, but you would have had to go to really nice semi-natural habitats like out in Tramore or the Dunes to actually see this bee. But since this park has opened and they've started a pollinator-friendly grass management regime on it with all these meadows and simple things like bird's foot trefoil and clover, this large carder bee is showing up. So it's just a really good example of how, you know, you put in the right resources and they will come, the bees will come. So we also work with existing networks and partnerships. So we don't, you know, we find that really, really great way of being efficient and cost effective. There's no project funding for the pollinator plan. So instead we work with groups like Eco Schools in Northern Ireland, Green Schools, the Heritage in Schools scheme. And this year SuperValue have done a major schools campaign where they've sent out materials, and they're working on lesson plans for all our primary schools. So that's a really exciting new scheme. We also work with Transport Infrastructure Ireland, for instance, on the transport corridors guidelines, GIY and Bloom and Borbia on the gardens. We work closely with the Department of Agriculture, who've sponsored a lot of the publications, the printing and design of our publications, and all the other farming groups to come up with actions that are you know, feasible for farmers and that will work. We also have business frameworks, so you can sign up as a business and become a supporter. We've over 240, I think, businesses signed up now, and that we work with Borbia on that. So we also did guidelines for local communities, and the heritage and officers and biodiversity officer networks across the local authorities in Ireland came together to fund an award, a special award in the Tidy Towns competition called the Local Authority Pollinator Award. And that's been absolutely amazing. We're really overwhelmed by what community groups are doing on the ground, and we're so open to helping pollinators, and it's been really lovely working with them. This is Geishel, who won this year, or last year, and well, they've won a few times actually, and Clonmel won a couple of years ago as well. So what they've done is they've actually sort of made an example of different public areas to show local people what they can do in their own homes. So these are some of the examples that they've reduced mowing, they've created these wildflower meadows with paths through them. That's a really important action that, you know, they cut along the edges so that people understand that it's still being managed, but it's being managed in a different way. Or some of the groups, including Clonmel, have done community orchards to help the bees and the local residents. We also produce a newsletter every year to show all of the different actions by the entrants. These are all our local authority partners. We decided to build a framework for local authorities to formally sign up to the plan. They were already doing an awful lot on the ground for pollinators, and now they can get recognition for that. So 22 councils across the island have signed up now. We're absolutely thrilled with that, and it's brilliant to work with them and to work with the environmental awareness officers and park staff. It's been really positive. And so we've done lots of other guidelines as well, how-to guides for golf courses, for group water schemes. It's sort of never ending, but if we're asked for something specific, we have lots of flyers on the website. And it's a really important part of the pollinator plan is to track change and measure success and see how we're doing. So at the end of every year, we published an annual review. And at the end of 2019, it showed, you know, 69% of actions were complete, 27% in train, and 4% not yet progressed. So it is really positive. It's been really positive, and we're hoping, or we're now working on phase 2 of the Pollinator Plan, which will run from 2021 to 2025. So we're not going anywhere. Another really important part of the plan is tracking changes, tracking the creation of pollinator-friendly resources, and tracking changes in the pollinators themselves. I just want to switch over to the website now to show you. I think this will answer a lot of people's questions. 1 second. No. Okay, so this is the this is actions for pollinators. No, I want to show you a different one. Sorry. Okay, so this is the Pollinators website. Up here, you can go back to the National Biodiversity Data Centre main website. This is has everything you need to learn about the Pollinator Plan. So you basically can go in there if you're a farmer, if you're a council, community group, and click on any of these sectors. So for instance, gardens, you can go in here and download the full booklet on the garden guidelines. Then there's flyers on pollinator-friendly grass cutting or garden plants that you might want to get, herbs that are good for pollinators. Then there's also a resources section, which takes you a little while to kind of get the hang of, but again, this is a really short menu to everything that we have available, all the different guidelines for different sectors. The junior plan is there in English and Irish. Then there's signage templates, which can be really useful if you want to, for instance, plant off a sign for your garden or your community group. Then there's also posters, things for schools, and all our annual reviews. And there's also presentations that can be used by groups or teachers, or anything like that. We also have a videos section with animations and videos to explain a little bit about certain actions or the background and the life cycle of some of the bees. We have conference videos. We have a blog area where people can post their own stories, like a communities blog where different Tidy Towns groups have posted stories of their interactions with the Pollinator Plan and what they've done in their own area. There's also here actions for pollinators. This is the mapping system, and also an area where you can record pollinators. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but if you want to become involved in any of the data centre's monitoring schemes, for instance, Bumblebee monitoring, you get all the training is given by the data centre. There's also a solitary bee monitoring scheme. And then there's a very simple, great one to start with for beginners, the FIT count. It's a flower insect timed count, and you basically watch a 50 by 50 centimetre patch of flowers for 10 minutes and record the insects that you see. And there's very detailed guidelines on how to do that, and helpful photographs and stuff to help you get started. So if we go into actions for pollinators, this is where we log all of the actions that are happening around the country. So you can go in here, for instance, like there's over 1,000 sites logged that have all begun, since the start of the Pollinator Plan. So you might go in here and you want to look at the amount of gardens that have been logged. You can also select what action has been taken. For instance, how many actions or how many gardens have reduced mowing, and you see those there. So it's really, really useful. So, and very easy to use. You just sign up here at this button if you want to log an area. So I'm going to just stop that now and go back to the other one. It's like talking to yourself. I think this is a bit crazy. Okay, so that's the website. I'm sorry, yeah, it gives us great information, actions for pollinators on what is actually happening, what changes are we seeing in the environment. And as I said, you can just go in there and you can actually draw around your garden. So it's quite easy to use, and there's tutorials on the website as well. So the Bumblebee monitoring scheme I mentioned, that's just a fixed walk, once a month from March until October along a fixed route, and you learn to identify the bumblebees. And I meant to say that there is a really good interactive guide to this, to identifying common species on our website as well. So just to talk about the guidelines, particularly for gardens, they all follow the same format, no matter what guidelines you're talking about, whether it's for a council or a business and so on. They're really straightforward. The idea is that they're pragmatic and they're low or zero cost. The first, for instance, they all follow the same A to G pattern, protecting what you have being the first one. So in a garden, you know, that might be an area of bramble or ivy, really, really important sources of pollen and nectar for our bees and other pollinators. Or it might be a bare bank, a bank of bare soil, south or east facing bank, and you'll find these little holes with the bees coming in and out. It might be to look at this anew, you know, this might be an area in your garden that you always wanted to fill in and plant up, but actually once you realize there's solitary bees there, this is brilliant. This is so much better than putting in a bee hotel, you know, to actually recognize those sort of habitats as important. And then you know, areas that you naturally have, that you've always had, that are good for pollinators. Hedgerows is a really important one for biodiversity in Ireland, not just for pollinators, but for birds and mammals. You know, it's important to recognise that this sort of management of our hedgerows, while absolutely necessary for health and safety reasons on roads, off-road hedges can be allowed to flower. You know, a lot of gardens, there's over 2 million gardens in Ireland, and a lot of them are large rural gardens, and they may have native hedgerow, and it's about, you know, talking to people about this and making them recognise native hedgerow as a really, really important wildlife refuge. And when they're allowed to flower, you know, it's about cutting them only 2 to 3 years, if that's, you know, okay for health and safety. And these native flowering hedgerow plants, all of them are really, really good for bees. So you have blackthorn in March, and then in May you have whitethorn, the Maybush. Really, really good. And then you might have road verges outside your garden that can be pollinator friendly. And, you know, there has been a kind of a shift and a tendency to tidy up, you know, that a lot of rural areas are now becoming more like suburbs or townlands where everything is being mown, you know, there's a tendency to tidy up too much. And we suggest that, you know, maybe you can just cut the width of your lawnmower along the road. It's still safe for walkers, but you're also going to get orchids and bluebells and, you know, lovely things like that. Then B is reducing the frequency in mowing. So this is a really simple and the most effective way you can help pollinators. Things like dandelions, again, really important. You know, you might not want, again, you don't have to let your whole garden grow wild, but as a wildflower strip like this, you still have an area to play for the kids or for recreation, but it can make that huge difference to provide food for pollinators. These are really nice examples. Donna Rainey from Don't Mow, Let It Grow in Northern Ireland took these. I think they're from a garden in Mayo. But again, if this homeowner had never let the grass grow, you know, it was very tightly mown over here, he wouldn't have discovered, or she wouldn't have discovered, this amazing spread of wildflowers. Likewise, you know, this is birdfoot stratifoil and clover. It mightn't look as showy as this, but it's absolutely brilliant for pollinators. And good news story that we heard about yesterday is that because of the lockdown, you know, there's been less grass cutting, and a very rare green-winged orchid has shown up in a Portlaoise housing estate after 120 years since the last record in that area of Laois. So really nice to think that these seeds that can live for a long, long time and survive for a long time are just waiting for the chance to pop their heads up if we let them. This garden shows, you know, different cutting regimes in the one garden. So again, this might be a playing area. You cut that regularly, you cut it once a week. This is cut only every 6 weeks maybe, and this has a lot of food for bees. And then this back area might be cut only once a year. So that's providing food and shelter. So again, road verges, you know, there is that option of letting the dandelions bloom. One of the actions under the pollinator plan is to just let the grass grow until mid-April, or do an early cut in March and then let it grow until mid-April, 6 weeks later. So that gives the dandelions a chance to bloom, and you know, you can cut them before they set seed. So yeah, dandelions are really important for bumblebees. You can see by these amazing pollen baskets on this bumblebee that they have lots of pollen and nectar, and this is actually what a bumblebee or a bee sees with their eyes. So you can see that target, it's almost like a target for a bee. So I think if we can reassess how we see dandelions, it would be going a long way to helping pollinators. This guy, unfortunately, a brilliant farmer who we work with very closely on the pollinator plan, he loves pollinators, says that the most dangerous thing in Ireland is a middle-aged man who gets himself a ride-on lawnmower. And I think I've experience of this myself. You know, there is a tendency, if you have the machine, you use it. Same with hedge cutting. You know, we've kind of gotten into that habit that you're able to cut things very closely and keep things very neat. So I suppose the pollinator plan is questioning that and saying, you know, maybe we can leave a little bit of space for nature. Then there's actions around pollinator friendly planting. So these sort of traditional planting schemes with geraniums, begonia, busy lizzie, daffodils, they actually don't have good pollinator or pollen and nectar resources. They're not bred for that. They're bred to be really, really showy. So it's about tweaking it. You can still have these plants, but can you add bidens or bacopa, for instance, which are pollinator friendly? There's lots of different pollinator friendly plants now available to, and you know, it's about going into a garden centre and actually look at the ones that actually do have insects on them. That's a really easy way to do it. These sort of traditional bedding plants, it's about moving away from those sort of annuals to perennials. It's also cheaper to do that. You know, we've done a cost benefit analysis and we've shown that it is actually much cheaper to plant perennials, which might last 10 to 12 years, whereas with annuals, you might be replacing them twice a year. And again, in terms of climate change and sustainability, that just isn't sustainable. Much better to buy and plant those perennials. Again, our planting code online has all of these different species, and we've nice flyers that you can print off or just take the names to your garden centre. If you don't have a garden, you know, you can also do this in a window box or in a hanging basket. You could also maybe do a herb planter. So there's also pollinator friendly bulbs that you can choose. If you're doing green manures, you can make sure they're pollinator friendly. If you have there's actions around nesting habitat. So sometimes that's long grass for bumblebees or earth banks for solitary bees. One thing to mention is that the cavity nesting bees, we do recommend smaller hotels, a few smaller ones. Like we don't want to, I know schools really like those big giant bee hotels that they look like you need planning permission for, but actually we wouldn't recommend those because you're actually more likely to get, you know, pests or disease in an area like that with lots and lots of organisms. So smaller and a few more of them. Then of course there's actions around reducing the use of pesticides. So again, spraying like this just isn't sustainable anymore. Is it necessary? You know, what value is it? Of course, pesticides do need to be used on invasive species or for, you know, health and safety issues. But where possible, can you reduce or eliminate them, especially in a garden? Is it possible to do that? So these are some more examples of, you know, that burnt ground that you get outside of gardens, where it's kind of just a habit. Again, they have the chemicals that are available in the shops, so why not use them? This is a park right beside a water source, which is unfortunate. And again, you know, to start looking at that afresh and say, you know, is that what you want to create? Then there's actions in gardens around raising awareness of pollinators. You know, we've just created a new Twitter account for the pollinator plan, so please do follow us and feel free to share any of our videos or social media posts. You could also, if you live in a housing estate, for instance, you could print off our guide for estate managers and pass it on to contractors. And if you do any of your actions, please do let us know. Please log your garden on our site. And if you want to get involved in monitoring the insects, we'd be very, very grateful. So I suppose to summarize, yeah, you can look at your garden as if you're a bee and you can kind of see, is there food there right through from March till October? Is there nesting areas? Is it safe? Am I spraying where I don't need to spray? And just new plants, you know, if you are buying new plants, can you choose some that are more pollinator friendly? And I just want to thank everyone who's helped with the pollinator plan. You know, there's been such an amazing buy-in from all different sectors, and so many organizations have helped us. And thank you to all the photographers who've allowed us to use their images. Hi, Bridget.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was great. And
thank you, Juanita. That was wonderful, wonderful presentation. And just to let people know, I think, Juanita, you mentioned it to me that a lot of the questions people tend to ask, there's information available widely on the pollinators.ie website. So in terms of what plants to source and what to grow, what are good for pollinators, all those kind of questions will be answered quite easily on your website.
Absolutely. It does take a little while. There's a lot on there, but if you look around, you know, there's an awful lot of information there. And I mean, that's one of the great positives. We want to share knowledge. So the blogs also are really interesting to read about what different groups are doing. It's all about free sharing of knowledge as much as we can.
I wanted to ask you about the meadows. I know people want to turn, some people who might be interested in turning their gardens into making little wildflower meadows. Does it actually realistically look like the photographs that you showed? Like, is it as simple as just letting things grow, and should they expect it to look like that straight away?
No, that's a really good point, and I should have mentioned that. It is a gradual thing. You have to be patient. So it depends on where you are and what the seed bank is there already. So you might just get dandelions, for instance, or if it's very fertile soil, it might take a while to even get those. But it's all about reducing fertility. So wildflowers do better in less fertile soil. So it's about cutting and removing clippings, not mulching them back in, and seeing what comes up. Like, we really do recommend that rather than going out and maybe killing off grass and buying seed. Like, if you do buy seed, you have to make sure it's native and locally sourced. So a much cheaper option is to reduce the mowing and see what comes up. Like, I've done it in my own garden in Kildare, and this, you know, it was nothing but grass. But now there's field forget-me-not and lesser stitchworth and birds for trefoil. Everything was obviously just waiting there. So
you're saying there's no need to help it, like it's going to take its own form.
Exactly. I mean, if you really want to help, it might be a case of getting yellow rattle, something like that, or collecting your own seed from very close by your site in autumn. That can be a really nice activity to do as well. But generally, in terms of cost and time, you know, each year it actually increases, and it's what's meant to be growing there. So it's a really nice kind of a way to approach it.
And thanks, Juanita. Just moving on to some of the questions that have been asked. Fran Igo has asked, is there data available to compare pollinator benefits and agronomic benefits of traditionally managed hedgerows compared to the short back and sides that are becoming more common in recent years?
Can you ask the first part of the question again? Sorry.
Is there data available to compare the pollinator benefits to the traditionally managed hedgerows compared to the short back and sides?
I don't know if there would be. I know. Sorry, there's an EIP project starting in Kildare now that's actually looking at that over the next 5 years. Again, it's being run by the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and that'll be really interesting because it's looking at those exact actions specifically on hedgerows, for instance. But in terms of data before and after, I suppose it's only since the 60s and 70s that we've started managing the hedgerows like this, and I assume that pollinators weren't really being monitored at that stage. But definitely there's research globally saying that if you do have wildflower margins, if you do have good hedgerows, you also have a lot of you know, insects that will eat pests, crop pests as well. So there's, I don't know for Ireland if there's been any, you know, significant research. It'd be worth checking with Teagasc. They would have information on that, I would say.
Juanita, just before I go to the next question, you mentioned this presentation could be accessible to people. Where can they access this? Will you just
yeah, no problem. I can give it to you if you'd like to put it on your site.
Okay. Yeah, great. We'll provide a link maybe to a PDF copy of the website. Another question there about the wildflower seeds. Is there are there workshops available on collecting native wildflower seeds? Is there sources that you recommend to buy these seeds from? How do you go about it if you want to plant your own wildflower seeds?
Yeah, so again, if you don't want to wait, like it really would be a matter of, waiting a year or two and seeing what you get yourself. If it's a kind of a planted area, there's certain parts of the countryside, for instance, in, Mayo, that you wouldn't recommend bringing in seed there. They have amazing semi-natural grasslands already. But if your area is, suitable, talk to your local biodiversity officer in the county council or heritage officer, get their advice, or a local ecologist. I wouldn't just go spreading seeds, that you buy commercially. But if you do the right way and you're still sure that's the way you want to go, the data centre does run seed collecting workshops in autumn. Hopefully we'll be able to do that again this year. There's also a guide on our website, a how-to guide called Collecting Seeds, and it has all the details of how you do it. And there are wildflowers.ie and Eco Seeds in Northern Ireland are two companies that sell native Irish seeds. So there are some available, but if you do a bit of research online, you'll find those.
There's another question by Mary Coleman. Is there a natural pesticide alternative like salt and vinegar solutions that can help us control weeds that won't damage soil and pollinator species?
Yeah, there are, and again, I haven't tried them out too much now myself, but there's a few websites. There's one called Pesticide Action Network. There's one in the UK, and they have lots and lots of alternatives to chemicals such as vinegar or salt or foam. A lot of local authorities are using foam sprays. So again, bit of research on it. The Pollinator Plan doesn't actually kind of recommend one over the other, and we're all about people seeing those weeds as wildflowers anyway. But absolutely, there are alternatives out there if you really don't want them in a certain area.
So Hannah Mulcahy has asked, where can we find success stories online? I presume your community blog would be a good place.
Yeah, that's a really good place. And the blog section itself. So, for instance, Ennis Tidy Towns have done an amazing job of changing the mowing regimes in the town and on roundabouts, and they actually show the progress over the course of 2 or 3 years, the number of wildflower species that have shown up and so on, just by cutting and removing those clippings and reducing fertility. So really good blog by Cormac McCarthy on the website on that. So absolutely, and people are free to email pollinators@biodiversityireland.ie if there's a really specific thing they're looking for. But if you look around the website, most of the stories are there.
There's a question by Rosa Marie. How would you deal with Scotch grass and bindweed taking over a newly prepared patch? They seem to be taking over before the wildflower seeds have germinated.
Okay, I don't know really specifically. Like, so for noxious weeds like docks and thistles and things that are described as noxious weeds, even if they are good for pollinators, we say you have to pull them, especially if they're in a rural area. So we use spot treatment or pull them. So again, if you have to use a pesticide, can you use it in the best possible way and follow the best guidelines? With those sort of grasses that she mentions, I'm not sure if wildflowers will ever be able to compete with those. It might be a case of putting in something like yellow rattle, which parasitizes or lives off grass, and it might help give the wildflowers a chance. But if you're talking about a really wet area or a strong area, maybe that's not the right place to try and plant wildflowers anyway. And it might be good for, you also have to look at it, is it good for some other type of biodiversity, that maybe it's a wetland area, that's why there's wet grass in there, it might be good anyway without trying to make it into a pollinator area.
And Archie Laffin says, just to mention, I'll let you know that we used a scythe to mow opposed to a lawnmower, and the increase in wildflower the following year was unimaginable. Have you had experience in this yourself, Juanita? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I know Laois, the Irish Wildlife Trust have done some amazing meadows in Laois, and again, we're waiting on a blog from them about that. They've used a parasite, and that can be a great option. So a lot of the challenges around reducing mowing are about how you remove the clippings, how you get in there. If you leave it for a year, it gets really long, it's harder to manage. So we do appreciate that. Like, there's challenges to changing anything, you know, changing from plastic to glass bottles or paper straws. We all have these challenges in terms of becoming more sustainable. So there are challenges around changing your mowing, but we've had great feedback on the sites and these parasites, which I didn't know existed, that they use in leash. And also Ennis, in the Ennis blog, he describes a thing called a zero grazer. Now, I think it's beginning to be kind of looked at by local authorities to bring in these sort of machinery that you can, they're small and it's not like having to get a tractor and trailer up onto a roundabout. They're kind of a small machine that can be, you know, put in an area and you can remove the clippings. So again, it's what works for your site. Like, it's all about weighing up what you can do and what you can't do. And not every site is the same. Not every school's yard is the same, or farm or business. So I suppose that's why we give an awful lot of actions as well, so that you can pick and choose the ones that are most appropriate for you.
Okay. Juanita, there's a question by Jerry Walsh. What happens after 2020? Is there going to be another pollinator plan, and will it be properly funded for another 5 years?
Well, so there's no project funding. There never has been project funding, but the Heritage Council and Bumblebee funded the project officer position for the first 4 years, or 3 years, and then SuperValue are actually funding the project officer position this year. So from 2021 to 2025, that's the new phase of the plan. We're working on it at the moment. We want it to be even more ambitious. We want to bring along all the amazing partners we've worked with to date. And hopefully, yeah, if anyone wants to fund it for 5 years, we'd be delighted to hear from them.
It's anonymous. Bridget, will we have one more question maybe?
Yeah.
When you cut, do you leave the clippings there for a period and then collect them?
Okay, so if you're doing it for like the yearly one, so if you're only cutting once a year in September and you want the seeds to drop out, that does make sense. If you're doing it every 6 weeks, no, just take them away straight away. But if you're doing it in September, yeah, you know, you want those seeds, wildflower seeds, to fall. So you can, if you can, leave it for a few days and then collect it. But if it's more convenient for a farmer to come in and do the whole job for you at once, if you have a very big garden, for instance, you know, it's again whatever works for you. But if you can leave them, yeah, that helps to get more seed for the following year.
Thank you, Anita. I think we have loads of congratulations, and people have really enjoyed that presentation. And there's lots of thank yous and wonderful presentation. Just so that you know, that there's a lot of people who've enjoyed this presentation. Thank you for taking the time to do this today. Yeah.
Thanks to everyone for helping pollinators. It's great.
Thanks very much, Juanita, from us as well. And just to say to everyone out there, we are back again next week, next Wednesday, with Clive Bright, who is a Farming for Nature ambassador. And Clive is an organic beef farmer from County Sligo, and he uses mud grazing and silvopasture farming for his animals. So if you want to find out more about how he manages healthy habitats for his livestock, then join us next week at 8 p.m. Don't forget to register beforehand, either on burnbo.com or on farmingfornature.ie. And if you have any questions for Clive beforehand, you can email us and we can send them on to him. Perhaps he can deal with them in his presentation. Otherwise, we look forward to you all joining us again next week. Or throughout May, we have a whole series. Thanks again, Juanita, for joining us. Great presentation, and I look forward to delving more and more through your website. I've been there quite a lot, missed out a lot of learning.
I hope that wasn't very boring, talking away to myself here. Afraid.
Just also, I just want to say before everyone leaves that this presentation, we will make it available on Burnbio's YouTube channel. As we have for the last, we started with Brendan Dunford, and then we've had Donal Sheehan. So all these webinars are going to be available on our Burnbio's YouTube channel. So if you want to access or share it with your friends, you should get a link to that, or you can just look up burnbio.com on the YouTube link.
That's great.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.